Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to Mysterious Library. Tonight, we're looking at a wonderful documentary from 1999 called Sasquatch Odyssey, The Hunt for Bigfoot, from director Peter von Puttkamer. I think that's how you pronounce Peter's name. Sorry if I got that wrong, if you're listening, Peter. It basically looks at the four horsemen of Bigfoot research, or particularly that period in their lives, which was getting towards the end of some of their lives. And the four horsemen, of course, are Rene Dahinden, Peter Byrne, John Green, and Grover Krantz. And it's fascinating because it looks at their professional and personal disagreements, and some of those still ripple through the Bigfoot community today. And we'll be talking about that and more tonight on Mysterious Library.
Greetings and salutations. It is another wonderful excursion into the Mysterious Library this evening. But before we get into Sasquatch Odyssey, which was, I honestly, sort of a bit nostalgic for me to go back and hear Grover Krantz and Peter Byrne and John Green, just all, going over and talking this, during that period. It was, again, great film. But before we get into that, we do need to remind you that the Kickstarter for the Sasquatch Legend Meets Science 2 is now live. So if you want to donate to that, I've got the link below in the doobly-doo, which is also known as the description for those who aren't technically savvy. Doobly-doo is the official technical term for that. But yes, we have the link there. You can follow to the Kickstarter. There's a lot of great rewards, and honestly, this, for those of you who are in the Sasquatch field, you're researchers, you're a fan, you know how much the Legend Meets Science, how important that was. This is taking everything to that next level. There's more technology, new techniques. It's going to be amazing. And really, for the amount that that Doug's trying to raise for this kind of documentary is super low. This is one of those things where, guys, you are going to change the world with this. Because anytime someone says, oh, there's no good evidence for this, you can literally point them to this and point them to your autographed copies of everything. See, that's why you should go. So again, after the show's over, go down to the doobly-doo right down there, right? Doobly-doo down there, and click, throw some money into the kitty, and let's Let's get this thing funded. Let's kick this off. Let's see what the new techniques are. Let's see what the new science is. Let's get some of these things tested. DNA, Sasquatch albivernix. We got some new stuff they're trying to get tested, and this is going to be a whole new world.
And of course, one of the wonderful perks is going to be the new book by Jeff Meldrum, right?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely.
And in many ways, Jeff Meldrum's kind of the newer, gentler Grover Krantz,
Grover
really,
Krantz, yeah.
in many ways, right?
Yes. No, he very much is. Nice tie-in, by the way. I see what you did there. Yeah, no, he absolutely is. And it's he's very much carrying that torch for the academic. So Legend Meet Science 2 Kickstarter is now live. There's some great rewards. You want to be a part of this. This is history in the making. Do it. Do it. Real quick though, Horace, I was planning on being in the chat live so I could harass you and Dean this past Saturday. But my daughter, it was her prom that evening, so I was otherwise occupied.
Oh,
So-
wow. Were you following the country and western song and sitting there and cleaning one of the shoe things that we probably can't mention on YouTube? You know that country song?
Yes.
From what's his name when the girl goes out with somebody and he says, "Come on in, son, sit right down," and then he
I know which one you're talking about. I can't remember. I don't think it's not David Allen Coe.
No, it's a new guy, or at least the one I'm thinking of. It's the same guy, I think, who does Gonna Take a Back Road. What's that? You know that.
Oh, I don't.
I used to have my truck. Is why I had it in my
don't
truck
listen to
spindle.
New country is trash.
Well,
I'm sorry.
some,
I'm
not
one of those.
all.
I'm one of
Some.
those. Okay, so there are some good people out there. There are some good out there, but by and large, it's all trash. Anyway, that having been said, I'm not going to say I did. I'm just not going to say I didn't. But I was otherwise occupied. So yeah, I'm sorry to miss that. I missed that live. I was hoping to harass the two of you while that was going on, but
Horace is always
Alas.
a wonderful guest. We'll have to have you do a show with him again at some stage.
yes, we've got to do that.
Next time we have him. Speaking of shows, though, I should do a quick pimp for my show on this network on Saturday night, Talking Weird.
Yes,
I have the man who probably is most responsible for me having looked at UFO phenomena and related conspiracy and paranormal type thinking academically, because I found his seminal book, Cosmic Conspiracy, when I was about 15 years old, on the shelves of a bookstore in Sydney called Dimmick's Books. I don't even know if that exists anymore. It was like the equivalent of a Borders or something, the massive
Gotcha.
book chain in Sydney. And Cosmic Conspiracy literally changed my life. And the author is Stan Deyo, who's well known by anybody who has an interest in this field. And I have him on Talking Weird on Saturday. And I cannot wait to.
jealous.
You can always jump in, say howdy.
I think I may have to.
You go. It's an official invite.
Well, actually, crap, I can't. I'm picking my wife up from the airport.
Oh no!
Oh my gosh! So maybe if their flight gets delayed, I can do that.
You can listen to it in the car at least on your phone or something, I guess.
Yeah, no, I was. I have to get up early tomorrow to take her to the airport, and she comes back Saturday night. So we'll see.
Horace said he was saved from your perplexing questions.
He was.
Good show. People should go back and watch it too. If they didn't see
I'll
it.
get you next time, Horace. You and your little dog too.
Oh dear. So, did you enjoy watching the film again? I don't know if you'd seen it
Yes.
before or not.
No, I haven't seen this
I hadn't
particular
either.
film. Yeah, I hadn't seen this one. I was like, wait a minute. You mean there's a film out there that's got Rene Dahinden and Peter Byrne and John Green and Grover Krantz? I haven't seen it yet. Heck yeah. And it's from 1999, the peak of human civilization. Of course I'm going to watch it.
This was a good year.
It was a good year. How sad is it that every time you go back and watch The Matrix and Agent Smith talks about how the year 1999 was the peak of human civilization, it just seems like that line keeps getting more and more prophetic. It's like, crap, we really did go downhill from there.
Oh yeah. And the funny thing is, in the 90s, I used to long for like the 80s, and now I'm like, I wish I was back I'd be happy to be back in the 90s. How great would that be?
Exactly. Yeah, before AI took over everything. Yeah.
Before everything took over. Everything. All the things that we don't love. Speaking of AI, though, I consistently use it to make the show art for for this and for
Yeah.
Talking Weird, so I might be very critical of AI running everything, and each week I'm like, "Oh, I need some show art. I'll just plug into Midjourney and see what I can find."
Well, so here's the thing, right? I know this is absolutely not what we're here to talk about, but AI is a wonderful tool. The problem is it makes a poor master, like fire. Just like fire before it, great tool, terrible master, and that's the problem.
What was
So,
Washington's line about the government? It was like, "Government is a fearful servant
oh,
and an awful master." Maybe
yes,
AI is a fearful servant as well, and we're just not conscious yet that it's gonna become an awful master when Skynet
yep.
drops and Arnold Schwarzenegger comes back from the future or the past with a metal exoskeleton to, I don't know, save or kill John Connor, whatever he's doing this week. It could be you. You might be the John Connor of the future, Jason.
Well, considering how things break around me, it's entirely possible. Someone said, "If you ever wonder if it's a bad idea, if no one from the future is coming back in time to stop you from doing it, it's probably not all that bad." So there you have it. There you have it. On on that note, back to the actual film. Yeah, no, I hadn't seen this one before, and so when you brought it to me, I was like, "Whoa, how have I not heard about this particular film before?" Because I loved it. There's some tropes of how they set it up and how they film it, but it's done masterfully. It really is. It doesn't feel like anything that's being retread. It's like I've heard all these stories before. I've seen all the evidence that they produced before, and it still felt solid. It still felt fresh. It didn't feel tired or hackneyed. Um, and we can come back to it, but I think my favorite scene has nothing to do with the four. It's with the guy who did the special effects or some of the special effects for X-Files.
Mhm.
And he said, "Well, this guy probably, at the time he would have done it better, the original, the special effects guy." And they flashed back to an interview from that special effects artist in the 70s saying, "I couldn't have made this."
Yeah, that is interesting. When he's talking about the Patterson Gimlin footage, the
Hmm.
special effects artist, it's interesting because the Patterson Gimlin footage divides special effects artists. I have a very
Yes.
good visual effects artist friend, Kerry Pryor, who's also a
Hmm.
director. He made a wonderful movie called The Revenant, but his background is in visual effects.
Hmm.
And there's an old Talking Weird before we were on the network where I had Kerry come on, and he thinks the Patterson Gimlin footage is legit. He thinks as
Yeah.
an effects artist, he looks at that and thinks it's legit, but I've seen other effects artists come and say, "No, that's a guy in a suit." So it's interesting how even depending how you wanna point the direction, how biased you wanna be in an interview, there's always an effects guy you can roll out to say it's true
Yeah.
or it's bogus. It's cool in that movie, though, you're right, that they have the new effects artist saying, "This is just a guy in a suit," and then they flash back to the main guy from the time saying, "No, it's 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 nothing I could imagine being done, being faked."
Yeah. I mean, again, the editing of that was wonderful, but like you said, it underpins sort of this question, like, why is it that you have such a different? Oh, that's Bigfoot influencers. He said he just chatted with Henry Frenzini, who was in this documentary. Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And yes, I mean, this is one of those things where this particular subject of whether or not it was again, was it a dude in a suit? Was it a legitimate unknown creature? The fact that we have such differing opinions from special effects artists, at least in there and says, okay, that right there is that wiggle room you kind of have to have. You realize, okay, if there isn't a general consensus amongst special effects artists, that's at least that means you can't honestly for me. I'm trying to figure out the best way of saying it. It means the idea of it being a suit is actually lower down on the list for me, because if it was clearly a guy in a suit, they would have seen it. And it's very easy to say, okay, then it's clearly a guy in a suit. But when the guy who was active at the time and the master of those effects at the time is looking to saying, yeah, I couldn't have made this, that at least says, okay, the suit, maybe you can't take it off the table entirely, but it moves further down that list as an active possibility. It's very easy for someone to come along 30, 40 years later and say, oh, I could do that. Well, could you though? Could you? Because here's my problem. Why haven't you? No one has ever successfully recreated this supposed costume at all. Every time someone was like, well, but people make Sasquatch costumes all the time. Yes, and they all look like guys in costumes. In fact, one of the number one problems is called stovepiping. There's literally a word for it, where the pants, where the pant legs of this costume, when the people are walking in these costumes, you can see that they're pants. Particularly on the bottom leg, around the calf and the ankle, it turns into a stovepipe in certain frames. You don't see that with the Patterson Gimlin footage. So why isn't that no one has actually created a costume that looks and works and is as versatile as this? Why can't they recreate all of the features of it? Yeah, there are plenty of people who've created costumes and on sound stages with clever cutting and clever lighting, you can make a very interesting looking creature. No one's been able to say, boom, just go out in the woods and walk across this in broad daylight and have the guy film you for a while and everything will be fine. No one's duplicated that.
There is one piece of footage out there which will convince everybody that it's a man in a suit, though. And that footage, I don't know if you've seen it, is it Bob Hieronymus is the guy who said he was in that suit? Bob Hieronymus just walking. His gait is Paddy's gait. Have you seen Bob Hieronymus walk?
Oh,
he walks like Paddy. And so I remember watching a documentary on it. He's like, was me in a suit? And I'm thinking, well, how do I know? And then they show him walking. I'm like, that's Paddy out of a suit. I'm being somewhat facetious.
Yeah,
but it was
I know.
a moment for me where I was quite like, I think that really might have been the guy in the suit.
Well, okay, so the Bob Hieronymus thing is really interesting because the description he gives of the costume that he supposedly wore, right? When he claims that he was this guy in the suit, okay, well, where's the costume? Well, he's like, well, Bob and them have it. Okay, but the description he gives of the suit isn't a description of what you actually see on film. That's the other problem here is and when they have had him put on a suit, right? He looks like a guy in a suit. He doesn't have the same things. And so we're led to believe that a couple of cowboys somehow managed to put together a technological breakthrough for special effects in the 60s. Suit with no money. They put this thing together and created something that has fooled some of the best special effects artists in Hollywood. And they never did anything with that. They never went and said, hey, I made this suit. Why don't you hire me out to make your costumes for your sci-fi films?
It is interesting. I mean, of course, they're all alternative, but they become more weird and conspiratorial theories that might explain Patterson and Gimlin being, somewhat patsies. I've heard theories that Patterson knew, Gimlin didn't know. I've heard all different theories. I'll be honest. I think it's a guy in a suit, but I wouldn't bet my house on it. If right now I had to make a bet one way or another, I'd bet guy in a suit, but I can't prove it. It's not a hill I'm prepared to die on, but who knows?
No, I get it. I mean, this is why one of the things I love about the documentary, and I think this is a great sort of transition point into Grover Krantz, since we've already mentioned him.
Can I just say quickly? That's what I was about to say. That's my favorite scene in the movie. My favorite scene in the movie is when Grover Krantz is doing his presentation on a still from the Patterson Gimlin film, and he's like measuring, saying from here to here, it's I'm doing Dahinden's accent. I don't even know Grant's accent. From here to here, it's 3 feet, and da da da. And then Dahinden loses his mind in the audience and going, "That's the most stupid thing I ever heard," or words to that extent. And this is in at a Bigfoot conference, and Dahinden is just screaming at Grover Krantz, and then other people are trying to defend Grover Krantz, and it's like, that is my favorite scene, but it's also my favorite component theme of the video or the documentary generally, is that these 4 people, the 4 horsemen that are these legendary figures in Bigfoot lore, really despised each other. There were real problems, and the discussions and the debates they were having then to kill or not to kill, it's just, some kind of glorified North American ape, or it's kind of, a relic hominid. These are discussions that are still had, but the animosity that those men had to each other It's incredible. The documentary is just worth it as a sociological view at the Bigfoot community, whether you believe in
Yes.
Bigfoot or you don't believe in Bigfoot, just to see how essentially the 4 founders of this
Mhm.
whole, research community had this interpersonal rivalry and
Yes.
hatred. Fascinating.
No, it is absolutely again, to your point, that is one of the best scenes of the film because they're just yelling back and forth at each other. And yeah, Dahinden was a personality. I mean, just dude's always been over the top, right? Okay, actually, so to Horace's point, there are films out there that are really interesting. The however, the problem is it's very few are as clean or clear as Patterson and Gimlin, but there are plenty of videos that are very telling and very suggestive of this being a living creature. Just none has that money shot that you get with Patterson and Gimlin, where it looks back at the
I
camera.
I love how you and I have a disagreement tonight. Just to read Horace Smith's
Yeah.
point for people who are listening. The alternative question is, why has no equally puzzling Bigfoot movie been obtained subsequently if the Patterson film was real, or do such films exist? It's something I actually was thinking of when I was watching the documentary. I was thinking, isn't it strange that back at the very beginning of Bigfoot mania,
Mhm.
2 cowboys go out into the woods looking to film Bigfoot, film the iconic film of Bigfoot, and today, where everybody has a camera in their hand essentially, perpetually, there isn't
Mhm.
anything approximating the Patterson-Gimlin film. You would think if Bigfoot sightings are
Mhm.
as common as they seem to be, if it was so easy for
Mhm.
Patterson and Gimlin to get that footage, you would think we would be seeing that type of quality of footage all the time. And to your point, yes, there is footage, but there's nothing which rocks the community the way that the Patterson Gimlin film still continues
Mhm.
to have that kind of impact. So I do think Horace has a good point there because it's something I was thinking of when I watched it,
It
to be
is.
honest.
Well, so here's the thing, it is, but there's actually some really good explanations for it. There's 2 really good ones. The first one is, you're right, everyone's got a camera on them. The problem is, it's this stupid thing, and this thing is not actually a camera. Not really, not the way you mean it, right? The problem is when you get out and, this is really good for selfies, or if you wanna do big landscapes, yeah, it's fine. But if you want an actual long if you wanna do actual animal filming, you need to have an actual camera with a long lens that you can get telephoto out. It's a very different type of thing. There are people who have very interesting films that they have caught on their cameras. The problem is it's at 70, 80, 100 yards, and so at that point, that camera's friggin' useless. But there are films that have come out from filmed in the '90s, early 2000s on actual film cameras or Super 8s that, again, are very, very telling. They're just not as profound. But one of the reasons a lot of people have speculated that Patterson and Gimlin were able to get as close as they were to this, to Patty, right? 2 things. One, at that time, Bluff Creek was literally the middle of nowhere. There just really weren't a whole lot of humans hanging out doing things to have maybe, for them to be maybe on have their hackles up about people in general. 2, they were on horseback the whole time. They weren't they were out in the deep woods at the time, on horseback. So a lot of people have speculated that with them on horseback, that sort of covered up the sound of them being on foot. And again, what has everyone been doing for the last 20 years? They go out on foot or on one of those four-wheelers, right? Going out in the middle of the night screaming, "Here, Bigfoot, 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 Bigfoot." It's a very different tactic where, people it's very different from what Patterson and Gimlin were doing. They were out in the primitive for a long time. They smelled terrible. They were on horseback. So if you're a Bigfoot and you hear couple of horses coming, they're not, that doesn't scream, oh, they must be humans. It's just, oh, probably another, some quadrupeds, maybe some dinner. All of a sudden you're like, oh crap, it's people. Right. So then you mosey. It's what created the opportunity. But again, there are plenty of films that people do look at that are really telling of something very bizarre being out there, and again, something organic existing. But just you don't have the same sort of money shot as Patterson Gimlin did.
Yeah, that's for sure. I often think too of Ron Moorhead's experiences at the Sierra camp, and despite being there for years and having relatively close interactions with these things and recording their audio, which I believe sincere, by the way, I believe they really did capture something on audio there that was not us. But they could not get a photo. They could not get film footage. So traditionally, it seems to be difficult when it seems to be, at least in my experience, not my experience, in my research, I have no experience, but when it seems to be a genuine thing, the ability to capture it seems to be, for some reason, always disrupted in one way or another. And that's another thing that leans me to being suspicious of the Paddy film, is that I think, why are there other cases that I think were genuine Bigfoot experiences where people have tried to film and failed? And this experience, which I'm more suspicious of, they have the most famous Bigfoot footage ever recorded. I mean, these are just the thought processes that go through my mind when I consider this late at night. I imagine you're more like Agent Mulder. I imagine you watching the Patterson Gimlin film on repeat, like at the end of Jose Chung's From Outer Space. Do you remember that episode?
Yes.
And as for Agent Mulder, what he does with his time, it's sick fantasy. I have no idea.
Love
And
that.
then Mulder's there just watching.
That is my favorite episode of the entire freaking series.
Yeah, mine too.
I love that one. Oh gosh, that was such a great series. Well, first 3-4 seasons were the best. Anyway, I'm not actually that obsessive about it, but going back to Grover Krantz's point, though, is Krantz got into it because he flat out said the odds of, because of what he was seeing in the trackways specifically, right? The details he was seeing in the trackway didn't track it, no pun intended, if they were faked. There were things that he was seeing as one of the leading physical anthropologists in the country. And again, I'm sort of second generation Krantzian, I suppose, is a phrase that could be used, because he was actually the mentor for my professor, who was my minor. So I got all those stories, directly from him. He looked at again what physical evidence there was and said, look, this just makes sense. Again, Occam's razor just makes more sense that this is a naturally existing creature. Now, again, this is where I would vary from him. I think what we have is a very, very small, highly mobile, intelligent population of creatures, but I do think the vast majority of Bigfoot encounters aren't Bigfoot encounters. Some are misidentification, yes, but I do think there's something else out there, supernatural, that they're in. So this is where we intersect again. I would say yes. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of encounters that are legitimate with something. I'm just not convinced that all of those encounters are a Bigfoot per se, but something different.
No, I love it that we disagree on this, but we have a comment from Asper60, which is Jamie Leonardo, I believe, or perhaps his beautiful wife Aspasia Leonardo, saying horseback is such an important point, plus the integrity of Bob and Roger is in question after many decades. Of course, Jamie and Aspasia do Aspasia, I always mispronounce your name. Sorry, Asper, if you're listening. They do the wonderful Down South Anomalies on the Untold Radio Network, one of my favorite shows on this network. So the people who haven't listened to that show yet should totally go and watch it. But Jamie has a good point. Of course, he always does.
Yes. No, absolutely. And this is one of those. So back to your point, just real quick, since we're just not even talking about the film at this point. Hieronymus, like, he took a lie detector test in the 80s, right? And he passed it. The problem is, someone's like, oh, so he passed the lie detector test in the 80s. Problem is, he'd been telling that story for over 10 years. And you can pass a lie detector test if you've told a story over and over again. The thing is, Patterson took a lie detector test in the 70s and he passed it. So there you have it, right? It goes back to, even the lie detector test is sort of conclusive on that. So it just goes back to what is the preponderance of evidence.
And Jamie and Aspasia say again, 16mm film is the best analytical medium
Yes.
to document such a sighting. And they're actually film curators and film historians. They have an incredible 16mm collection themselves, so they know of what they speak. And Saga Man says they are real. I've seen them a few times now. I'm not doubting there's a real phenomenon. I'm just overwhelmingly uncertain whether it's a physical flesh and blood hominid or, relics, great ape or undiscovered North American wood ape. I think so many, and this is where we can get back into the film. One of the points in the film, and this is a point of mine, but in a very different direction, is the catch or kill kind of idea that John Green and Grover Krantz were like, well, this thing's some kind of ape. Let's shoot one so we can prove it. While Peter Byrne and Rene Dahinden were like, no, this thing seems semi-human. We don't want to shoot this thing. It'd be murder. That was one of the big divides between them. Of course, the question to me isn't whether we should shoot one or not. It's the reverse of the Jeff Goldblum point that he makes in Jurassic Park. His point is scientists thought so long about whether they could do it, they didn't think whether they should do it. I think the question in the Bigfoot community is people have talked too long about whether they should do it to ask the question of whether they could do it. The reality is the literature is filled with people who have taken shots at Bigfoot. It's filled with people who've said they've hit Bigfoot, filled with it. It's not the popular, it's not the literature which is going to be written by a flesh and blood aper, but it's the literature of when people like Jerome Clark and John Keel and Lauren Coleman, back when Lauren Coleman wasn't a flesh and blood guy, these people documented plenty of Bigfoot shootings, right? Nobody of a Sasquatch ever dropped. Nothing was ever recovered. The most famous one is Ape Canyon, where supposedly Fred Beck shot one and it tumbled off the cliff, but was never found. And they'd spent the whole night shooting at these things. But there's report after report after report. Now, do we just dismiss all of those and say all of those people were liars or all of those people were bad shots? Or do we go, hang on, if we're taking this report of somebody having a close encounter with a Bigfoot where it looked at them and stole a candy bar and ran away, or came at them hollering and they ran away, whatever the story is, but we're going to dismiss every firearm engagement just because, well, we don't want to look at the firearm engagements because the firearm engagements tell us something we don't want to hear. And what that is Bigfoot is either bulletproof or it's supernatural or it's something somehow that isn't affected by good old boys with plenty of firepower pumping round after round after round into this thing. That's the reality. So I don't even think the discussion should be, can we or should we? The discussion literally should be, is this something which is even going to make a difference if we shoot at this thing? We mightn't be able to shoot them anyway.
No, and I'm just glad to go back to the good old days of should we kill them or not? Honestly, that's where my nostalgia came back. Oh, I remember those lovely days when that was the conversation that was being had. Because to your point, again, one of the things about the film I did like was they did start off with, getting a lot of different people who'd had different encounters and had different thoughts. And they had them out, right? They got a chance to have their say as an introduction into Rene Dahinden and Peter Byrne and John Green and Grover Krantz to get into sort of the world that they had helped build in a way with that conversation of, again, where Peter Byrne and Rene Dahinden didn't like each other because they worked together for a long time, and they very much had their opinions about this, which goes back to the whole, if there's one thing that Rene Dahinden said towards the end of the film that I completely agree with, which is that nobody asks the questions of the people who've done this in the past, right? I completely agree. I think that with him in that field, it does seem like a lot of knowledge has been sort of ignored or just lost in, it just sort of lost because people haven't gone back to look at what everyone's already done. Everyone keeps reinventing the wheels. I agree with that observation because, Peter Byrne was doing this since Tom Slick. Like, he was part of Tom Slick's group that was looking for the Yeti, and then they were looking for Bigfoot. So a lot of this stuff does go back, and we do have a lot to learn from these people, at least definitely for what doesn't work.
I Another thing, I suppose, on a
Mhm.
related story about these guys, we're talking about them hating each other. This is a different topic altogether, but it was hilarious. Was
Mhm.
how John Green apparently never let go of the fact that Peter Byrne and Tom Slick used to go out womanizing and hitting the
Yes.
clubs and things. And one of the interviewees, I can't
Yes.
remember who it was like, John Green's still talking about how Peter Byrne used to go out womanizing and hitting the clubs. And Peter Byrne's like 70 now. We're talking about
Yeah.
something that happened 30. It's just so funny. But so
Yes.
all those animosities stayed true. And
Mhm.
there's those personal details you don't know. Like I didn't know Tom Slick and Peter Byrne went out womanizing together. And
Oh,
for those who
yeah.
don't know, Tom Slick's the Texas billionaire who would finance these famous Yeti
Mhm.
hunts in Nepal and Bigfoot hunts here. But that
Mhm.
him and Byrne were such buddies because they used to like to go out partying. Just a
Yes.
fascinating little side note that you don't get in the official histories, you know.
Yeah. Oh, no, again, this is guys, when this is over, y'all gotta go watch this because it is a great documentary because they do have those stories. And my favorite Bigfoot story of all time, well, not Bigfoot, Yeti story of all time is, there's this hand, this mummified hand in Nepal that the monks had, and they said it was supposed to be a Yeti hand, right? Well, they get a sample of it. They were basically able to sort of bribe one of the monks and convince him to give him a sample of this hand. It's smuggled out in with Jimmy Stewart's wife's lingerie. Jimmy Stewart was there, was a friend of Tom Slick's, and they smuggled it out in her lingerie box. And it is my favorite story of all time because it
It's
is
fantastic.
just it's one of the stories you hear, like, I'm sorry, Jimmy Stewart's wife helped Tom Slick smuggle a Yeti, part of a Yeti hand into the US for testing in her underwear. Who makes up that story? Like, that's not a story anyone if you paid somebody to come up with a story like that, they couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah,
It
it's a fantastic story, and apparently her
Mhm.
lingerie case, which they smuggled
Got
the
lost.
handout in, disappeared, and they thought, "Oh,
Mhm.
no, they found it," and then British Customs brought the lingerie case back to the room that they were staying in, and Jimmy
Yep.
Stewart's wife said, "Oh, I hope you didn't open my lingerie case," and the customs officer said, "Madam, we would never open the lingerie case of a lady,"
Yeah.
and Peter Byrne tells that story, and it's fantastic. It is, it's hilarious.
Yes. It is my favorite sort of Bigfoot story. And they don't really go into it. I think this is definitely a subject for another show, but it touches on the fact that a lot of the Yeti stuff, a lot of what Tom Slick was doing. Again, yes, he did believe in this stuff. He was financing it, but a lot of this stuff also correlates with the CIA. A lot of cryptozoology was used as sort of the front for early CIA maneuvering. In fact, James Bond is actually named after a famous ornithologist because ornithologists were used as a way of sort of, as a cover for a lot of CIA spooks moving back and forth because you could bring all this equipment for long range observation and all these. Because remember, this is back in the day, you couldn't just throw up a little drone and hear something 50 miles away. You actually had to have some substantial equipment. So, cryptozoology and ornithology, these were all big sort of fronts initially for particularly going to China, anything to do with the Chinese border and stuff like that. So, I'll, again, subject for another time, but that's where this is how this all sort of played into it. And that's kind of a lot of what Tom Slick was participating in and funding on the side. But he did believe in this, which is why he funded, which is what gets Rene Dahinden, Peter Byrne, and John Green together initially, is Tom Slick financing very meagerly the initial Bigfoot research.
Yeah, it was a fascinating period, and of course, what isn't spoken about that often is that none of these 4 men who gave massive parts of their lives to Hendon, Krantz, Byrne, and Green, none of them ever had an encounter.
Yeah.
the Sasquatch. None of them ever saw a Bigfoot. So it's kind of funny today that these people were the leaders in the field, and every second person today who goes out squatching, 10 miles off, or 5 miles or 2 miles away from where they drove their four-wheel drive in, they communicate them with knocking and they see them with night vision, and people are seeing Bigfoot all over the place. These four guys, funded by millionaires, way out in the middle of nowhere, the best they might have got is a track,
Although they do point out, and it is a hilarious comment. They said, yes, we were funded by a millionaire, but you wouldn't know because we were driving our own cars. Like, the funding he gave them to go look for Bigfoot was quite meager, even for that time. So
sure, but don't forget, Peter Byrne even says in the movie he raised over $3 million to do Bigfoot investigations in his time. $3 million is a lot of money.
It is.
Even if it's spread over 30 years, that's a lot of money to do Bigfoot research with.
Oh, yeah. No, that is. And that is something that he does absolutely mention. That is something that should be put into context. Like, okay, if you've spent $3 million over the last 30 years doing this, I mean, $3 million over 30 years, okay. It's not a whole lot of money, all things considered, but it's not the worst. That ain't the worst job to have either.
And I shouldn't beat up on poor Peter Byrne because he's still alive. I think he's the last one we still have, and he seems like a wonderful old gentleman. I would love to sit down and have a beer with Peter. The stories he could tell, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But we did Peter Byrne's seminal book on Bigfoot research.
Yeah, we did.
In one of the early episodes of Mysterious Library. People should go back and watch it. In that book, and we made the point, he was talking about, well, we'll get this thing in 5 to 10 years or something, maybe 10.
Yeah.
At the end of this documentary in 99, when he's about to retire from active Bigfoot research, he's like, we might get it any day. We might get it this year, but we might get it in 5 years or 10 years. Now, flash forward, we're getting close to 25 plus years after that. We still don't have Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So these predictions that we're going to get this creature, which have been going back probably to the 60s.
Yeah. I did the math on this. It's $100,000 a year. $3 million over 30 years. It's $100,000 a year. And again, you have to realize this is 70s money, 80s money, 90s money. So that's that $100,000. Now, again, you have to understand, it wasn't like he was getting $100,000 a year every year, right? They were coming in chunks and they were being spread. And again, if you're doling out money to buy equipment and to pay people to do things, that money goes away real fast. So it sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't in the grand scheme of things. But yes.
Well, there would have been chunks where it was a big amount of money given to supposed high-end big game hunters, which Peter Byrne, by all accounts, really was, and serious people. Like, I remember in that book, he's bringing in the army and that to help him in the original book, right?
Yeah.
And if that caliber of research, the best it ever gets is a footprints. And today, some guy down the road here goes 2 miles off a path in central Wisconsin and hears whoops and gets supposed night vision video of red eye or whatever. It just seems to me that when the 4 greatest Bigfoot hunters in history couldn't get anything more than a footprint, and today every second Bigfooter supposedly is getting interactions with them. I mean, were those guys so incredibly inept? And now we have these amazing, Bigfoot hunters who can get I mean, come on. Something's going on here that either Bigfoot's easier to find now, or Bigfoot was hard to find then and is still just as hard to find, and all these people are somehow not having real experiences, or maybe it's paranormal. Yeah. That said, maybe it's a paranormal experience, and then I'm all in. I'm like, okay, this is something else. It's not a flesh and blood ape. I'm with you. People can have paranormal experiences in a house, in a car, in my back 40, anywhere. So if that's your point, I'm about, let's pay attention to this thing. But if the only point is, and I'll make one other point and then I'll hand it over for a minute. This ties in with something John Green says, which has become a standard APA kind of aphorism now, right? An APA aphorism. I think I just coined a term. That's fantastic.
There you go.
But the APA aphorism is that you don't solve one mystery with another mystery.
Yes.
But that's so insane. That's like if you're a police officer and you have one murder here and you have very little evidence, but there's a very similar murder over here. Well, I'm not going to solve this murder by looking at that murder. No, you go, well, this could be a serial killer. So what can we learn from this murder over here? So if there's a weird encounter over here, which has some similarities with something here that we think's a flesh and blood ape, but this thing over here is either bulletproof or it's a poltergeist and does similar things to Bigfoot or whatever, then to ignore that other mystery and just say, well, I'm not
Mhm.
going to solve this mystery with looking at that mystery.
Yeah.
That's just so reductionist. And the problem is John Green
Yeah.
he was clearly invested in a belief system, but the problem is people who followed in his tracks and continue. I've heard people say that a lot. Well, you
Mm.
don't solve one mystery with another mystery, like they're really smart. No, that would destroy the entire history of like criminal profiling if you took that attitude, my friend.
Well, it would actually destroy a lot of history, the history of most scientific discoveries also. However, I think the problem is more specifically in context, he really was referring more to people who go and say, "Hey, um, well, maybe the reason we haven't found a body is because it's aliens and it's UFOs, and that's really more what he meant." But to your point, you're not wrong. Like it is a very famous John Green quote. I've heard it all the time, and it's a sort of variation of Occam's razor. I don't think he would necessarily, though, have. Well, I agree with you. He was very much invested in the materialist worldview. We talked about his book, right? Very specifically, that was the perspective he was coming from. I do think it's a variation on Occam's razor. I don't think that John Green would necessarily disagree with you if you say, "Hey, I have a list of these accounts, and they are remarkably similar. Maybe we should look at this phenomena from that perspective." I don't think he would disagree with you in those regards. He would probably disagree about, he would just say again, well, then maybe those are some other kind of Bigfoot as well. And people just, again, sort of like how ancient astronaut theoreticians will say, well, maybe it's the reason Fey lore looks so much like UFOs is because it was always UFOs and aliens from another planet, kind of a thing. But back to my point, yes, I do completely, actually, very much agree that I think one of the reasons there seems to be a lot more interactions because I do think a lot of it is paranormal. However, from the archaeological side, let me throw this at you. Most of the great archaeologists don't actually find the sites. We've had this conversation before. If we only allowed materials into museums that were collected by archaeologists, the museums would be closed. They wouldn't have jack diddly crap because usually the great archaeologists aren't the ones finding things. Now, they may finally oversee the excavation, but the people who find it are the average everyday person who can go out and is in the nooks and the crannies of the world. Who do you think is going to find something? The one professor who has one summer to run out and say, okay, dig here? Or is it the 400 or 500 unemployed 17-year-olds who know that if they find some pottery, they are probably going to make a payday? And so to that point, what we have is a lot more people going out and looking and actually going out into the field and looking and being able to report it. This is one of those bigger aspects to this where they can actually turn around and say, hey, I saw this thing in the 70s and the 80s and even in the 90s. That was a hard thing to do. It was hard for people to communicate with this. So yeah, you have the four main guys. Absolutely true. But they're four people versus thousands of people running around doing things. Now, again, I'm with you that I think a lot of these encounters aren't what they think they are. However, it actually is logical to think that these four may not come up with much, but if you have hundreds of people or thousands of people running around poking their noses where they weren't poking their noses in the 60s and 70s, right? Because there was a lot less development, maybe we would come up with more.
Again, I think if it's a paranormal thing, you have a point. Somehow we're evoking or we're interacting. But if it's an undiscovered ape, if people like Green, who is seriously financed, can't find anything short of a footprint, yet some guy can every Sasquatcher I've ever talked to has had some experience today. That's the reality. That's my point, I guess. Every Squatcher who might never have been more than 10 miles from a road has had, maybe no more than 2 miles from a road, has had some kind of Sasquatch experience. And I'm not making fun of it because I think maybe this is something which isn't aperish, right? But when the four main guys were way
Mhm.
out in the middle of nowhere, the army helping them, millionaires helping them, couldn't get squat diddly, it says to
Mhm.
me that they either had the wrong approach or the people who have an approach now are but have are basing that approach on something which isn't true, that there are physical apes, right, running around
Mhm.
North America. Because how are they all having these experiences? It's that easy to have an encounter with a physical ape. To Texas Jack's point before, saying, well, a lot of people don't have the right caliber gun to bring down a big animal. I got guns in my cupboard here that could bring down a Bigfoot. We're not talking about, I got guns in my cupboard that could probably bring down an elephant if I shot it, more than twice, right? Literally. I mean, I really do. Most Americans
Okay.
do, I think.
Well, that would okay. We're gonna have that conversation off air because now I need
Yeah.
to know. What
No,
exactly? What
I
do
don't have
you keep it in
anything
your cupboard?
I
And
don't
what do
have
you keep in
anything
your cupboard?
I don't have anything ridiculous, but my point is
Mhm.
there are poachers shooting elephants with AK-47s, literally killing them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to have some 50 caliber Barrett to bring down a Bigfoot or an elephant. I mean, you
Yeah.
literally don't. You can probably kill any land animal in America with a 22 if you shot it in the right place. That doesn't mean you should be shooting any land animal in America with a 22. But my
Mhm.
point is, I don't for a minute believe that most Americans don't have a firearm that's capable of stopping a
Mhm.
Bigfoot, seriously stopping it and leaving a serious blood trail. And I'm not talking about
Well,
just a 22,
yeah.
I'm talking about just stuff that is a standard hunting round. Most people who shoot at
Mhm.
deer have a caliber that would seriously impact a
Yeah.
Bigfoot.
Well, so okay, great point here. There's a difference between stopping something in its tracks and then wounding it, and maybe it dies later, but you can't find it.
Yeah, but you listen to these reports is my point, and they're
Yeah.
swatting the bullets like flies, or nothing's happening, or they're
Right.
disappearing
Okay.
in a puff
So
of blue smoke. It's not like the Bigfoot gets hit,
Mhm.
"Ah," and then, like, stumbles off. It's like, "Wah," swatting literally, the stories are things like swatting bullets. No,
Right.
nothing at all happening. The bullets, like, I don't know, bouncing off, like,
Mhm.
they're crazy. None of them sound like a big animal that's been hit and has limped away, and nobody's gone, "Well, there was a blood trail." Like, I obviously didn't
Oh,
wound the
there
thing, but
hold on. There are stories of blood trails. In fact, one of the most famous stories here, actually here in Texas, Texarkana, the Fouke monster, technically it's Arkansas, but we'll take it on the Texas side. It had a kid shot it, and because he was out, he heard some dogs, trailing a deer. He went out, the thing scared him. He shot it. It left a blood trail, and people went out there. They were the dogs wouldn't track this thing because the dogs were terrified of it. They literally some of the best hunting dogs in that area. And these were people who a lot of these people were professional trappers. They brought their dogs out. The dogs would not trail this thing, but they did find blood trails. They did follow the blood trail. But again, it just disappeared into the thick woods. So there are stories of
oh,
people
that's
finding
interesting.
blood trails. So which goes back to my point, which is this is why I think there's actually two very different phenomena. To your point, you're right. And hold on, Thomas has a great line here. Let me throw that up there real quick because yeah, there's a lot of people who are just sorry. I'm going to get back to those other comments, but Thomas is right. There's a lot of hoaxing and storytelling going on. In just let's be honest, there is a lot of hoaxing, a lot of people just telling stories right there with you. However, to Dean's point, which I completely agree with, I think there's a lot more people who are having actual encounters with something. It's just not the naturally existing, you know, Gigantopithecus blackie,
And I
right?
should say hello to Thomas as well. I'm a big fan, actually. I have a couple of Thomas's books. His research
Mhm.
is fantastic. I'm sure we disagree, but it's nice to know that he's listening.
And yes, that's completely correct. I am on the money. Thank you. Thank you for the backup. Hold on. So, Horace, this is actually one of those great crimes of history. No one, because these were just a bunch of good old boys in the 60s, they didn't think to take samples of the blood. They didn't do it. This is one of those things where it did happen. It's well documented. Dozens of people were involved. They just didn't think that way. They were just, oh no, I shouldn't, like, why would we take a sample of it? We're just going to track the creature, right?
Well,
So,
what's the Texas, Oklahoma one? Hanaboya, or how do you pronounce that town? Hanobia,
oh,
where
that's
there was yeah,
yeah.
that's a 90s story, right? Those guys were shooting Bigfoots every
Mhm.
night. Like,
Yeah.
literally, they were there
Oh, I know.
opening up with their AR-15s and equivalent rifles every night
Mhm.
at Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And I
I'm the
believe, incidentally, I've heard
Mhm.
enough of that story that I think something legitimately was happening there.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think these things were just normal physical apes.
No,
Something was
I
going
agree
on,
with you
but,
on that.
I
Hey,
mean, if
I've
you
I've
I don't
had
know.
my encounter at Brown Springs. I will never say I had any kind of encounter with a Bigfoot there because I didn't. I will say I had again, I'll call it a dream because I don't know what it was, but if what I saw in my dream, the things that I saw in my dream are the things that were walking around our cars that night or that morning, then I don't think that we were dealing with actual Bigfoot. And given the overall situation, the overall hinkiness of that area, I'm not convinced that it is a Bigfoot that's out there. I think it is something more paranormal. Now, is it a good place for Bigfoot to maybe travel through from time to time? Yes. There is a very interesting video that will never be made public that is very telling of perhaps something physical, at least moving through the area. So there you go. Yeah, it was one of Smokey Crabtree's boys. Now okay, that's oh man, if I open this can of worms, we are never getting okay. That's good. We're gonna have to talk about this one day. You know what? We're just gonna have to review
Legend of Boggy
The
Creek.
Legend of Bucky Creek just as a way to talk about this because I think there's a big question mark that I have about the entire Falcon Monster phenomena that begs some questions for me. But there you go.
I have to just laugh at Jamie's comment. He said, "What sort of weapon are you using, Dean, to shoot a possum in the chook house? A little bit, shall we say, overkill." Well, I also have deer hunting rifles, which I think would be able to take down any gorilla, which I guess a Bigfoot's similar to. So that's why I'm suspicious that good old boys in America don't bag these things when they shoot at them.
Yep. Well, again, so here's the thing: the ones I actually believe, the stories I do tend to believe, are the ones who say I couldn't shoot it because it looked too human.
I think they're
Those are the ones
legitimate too. I do. I think they're
Yep.
legitimate stories too.
So, but anyway, we haven't even talked about the freaking film, and it's such a good film, guys. Go see the movie. It's good. It really is. You can watch it free on YouTube. It's worth the watch. I just love the fact that this was a great way to sort of end cap that first generation of Bigfoot hunters. And while I do have my thoughts about Rene Dahinden, he does make again the one line that I think is absolutely 100% true is that people aren't necessarily going back and looking at what was done before, at the questions that were asked before. The people who spent millions of dollars and they're in 30 years of their lives looking into this phenomena, and they've sort of just been ignored, and everyone's moved on to the new generation of Bigfoot hunters. You know, your Ken Gerhardts, your Lyle Blackburns, your Matt Moneymakers, your Cliff Brockmans, and it's you run Moorheads. And while again everyone brings something to the table, we do need to you need to know where you've been to know where you're going, right? Again, one of the reasons I have Grover Krantz, like I've got a direction with Grover Krantz. I can make Grover Krantz's argument better than Grover Krantz can, and I'm the one who says, yeah, but with that argument that he pioneered, and I believe it. I think it's a solid argument. I've had to define it down a little bit. I've had to make it even more specific because we've had 30, 40 years. These guys put in 30 years of effort, and to Dean's very valid point, they didn't bring back a whole lot. That does require us to ask some hard questions. Why don't we have this material? Why is it seemingly so difficult to snag one of these, to snag material of these creatures? Like their work and the film does a great job of showcasing their history, their stories, but we need to look at their work and say, okay, they spent 30 years doing this. What can we learn from this? And maybe we need to start asking different questions because you spent 30 years doing this and you don't have more than just some footprints to show for it. again, the footprints are really, really important. I never want to downplay the importance of the footprints because they are actual physical evidence that something is happening, and they are very telling. In fact, one of my favorite scenes in this film, I'm going to go late. We're just going to go long on this one, is the fact that he shows the infamous bear double print, right? Because this is the thing we hear all the time. Well, it's a double step by a bear. That's what all these Bigfoot tracks are. Because you got to explain the tracks somehow, right? And he shows an actual cast of a bear double print. It's like, no, this is what you're talking about. This does not, it's somewhat reminiscent of a Bigfoot track, but it's very clear it's not a Bigfoot track. You can see the other toes off to the side. You can see the claw marks from the toes. It's like this shows no, the bear double step theory doesn't really work, not in mass, not when you have long trackways of Bigfoot tracks.
I love another footprint story in there, or a cast story in there, the one which Dahinden tells about a student of Grover Krantz's hoaxing him with a fake plaster cast from Indiana, I think is the
Yeah.
story. So there's always going to be contention with footprints, and I know there's more and more sophisticated ways of looking at them. I think one of the things Doug's documentary is doing, the new one, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, is I think they're actually going to a microscopic level and looking at alleged sweat pores on it, which is fascinating. I mean, if you can get down to that level and see things which shouldn't be in a fake cast, I think it's super interesting. And again, I don't write out that these things aren't real in the sense people are experiencing something that looks big and hairy and can affect our world. I just think that in a woo-woo sense that they're not here all the time. The problem is, of course, as this documentary does a wonderful job of doing, woo-woo gets such a bad name because there's these people who go, oh, they're our friendly 8 brothers from another dimension and da-da-da. I think it's far more complicated than that. I think all of reality is far more complicated. And these Sasquatches, along with UFOs and along with ghostly apparitions and along with Virgin Mary apparitions and a bunch of other things are, for lack of a better term, just to be trite and to make it fast, a glitch in the matrix. Something somehow comes into this reality and leaves again. So I don't doubt these people are having those experiences, but if we can get to a level where there seems to be proof which suggests this thing is here permanently and doesn't come and go, I'd love to hear. I'd love nothing more than there to really be Sasquatches out in my woods. There's a Sasquatch sighting down the road from me. It's in one of Linda Godfrey's books, so it's not that I'm not interested. I just find it difficult to accept that there's a flesh and blood undiscovered primate in North America where people encounter them consistently in rural America. We're not being mean to Texas, Jack, but where there's more guns than people, and I myself wouldn't want to shoot one, right? Real or unreal, I don't want to shoot one, but I just find it so hard to believe somebody hasn't bagged one yet if they're real. I just find it really hard to believe.
And this is, that's a fair point too. Thomas's question is, what different questions would you ask? I think the number one issue that I have is, and it's very understandable why, specifically Peter Byrne, right? Because we talked about his book in one of the first episodes we did was Peter Byrne's book, is that the presupposition was this is an exclusively materialist phenomena. And so because of that, every sighting of anything that was sort of anomalous became a Bigfoot. And that's been, I would argue, a fatal flaw. One of the things I like to say a lot is we don't know what they are, so we can't say what they aren't. Meaning, if someone came to me and said, Jason, I was on an expedition to South America and we saw a tribe of gorillas, first words out of my mouth would be, hold up. We know what gorillas are. They live in Africa. So we do have a problem, but it's not impossible. Someone maybe brought a tribe of gorillas over. But then you tell me they're covered in red fur and they have stone tools. I'm going to say, okay, that's whatever you encountered wasn't a gorilla. We know what a gorilla is, so we can say what it isn't. We don't really know what Bigfoot is. And because they had a very specific view, there was no way for them to say, well, what isn't a Bigfoot? So there's a lot of things in this box, a lot of encounters in this Bigfoot box that is being assumed to be Bigfoot. And I think at this point we have to say, okay, well, hold on. maybe this isn't all the same phenomena. And when you do that, it does allow for other details to pop out. And one of the other problems, a lot of the accounts of Bigfoot that we have of official record of, they've been manipulated. Just straight out, we have to be honest about this. They are. Anything that does sound wooish, guys, by the way, if you are in the woo crowd, can y'all please get together and come up with another word? I'm sorry. I love y'all, really do, but only Ric Flair can get away with saying this.
I don't know if they call themselves woo, though. I think that's a disparaging term, the same way
It
ape
is.
is a
No, it is.
disparaging term. Like, I don't think people who believe in flesh and blood North
Call
American
themselves. Yeah, they don't.
apes call themselves apes. Speaking of people who might or might not believe that,
Mhm.
another one of my favorite Bigfoot researchers is watching tonight, and he said, "True." I'm not sure if it was one
Mhm.
of my comments or one of yours or one of the other commenters, but Todd Neese
Mhm.
is on the line. I've had Todd on Talking Weird back in the day. I should get him on again. I
Mhm.
really find Todd just a fascinating guy. So it was wonderful to know that both Todd as well as Thomas Steenberg
Yeah.
were listening, like, because they're both probably closer to a flesh and blood approach than I am, but they're both researchers that I respect an awful lot.
Todd's saying about Rene. So I'm just going to assume that he's saying that what I was saying is true. I'm officially endorsed by Todd Neese. Thank you, Todd. That's what we're running with. Hold on. Hold on. Tom has a great point here. So it's not so much as asking different questions. It's more, you suggest more clarification to whatever question is asked. It's both. Again, I think there are questions that weren't asked as early on because of the assumptions made. Again, going back to Grover Krantz, dude, my archaeology professor was literally mentored by Grover Krantz. I heard all the stories. So straight up, it doesn't get much better than Grover Krantz in my opinion. And the simple fact of the matter is, I like his all of the main theory. I had to redefine it a little bit because I think after 30 years of his research, actually 40 years of his research, you got to start asking more questions. You can't just the physical thing just doesn't for as an explanation for all the phenomena just doesn't work anymore. So there you go. I think the problem is we got to re-examine a lot of the assumptions on both sides, right? Not just I know we're kind of, it seems like we're both coming down real hard on the physical, but we're not. It's actually both sides of this equation. We need to kind of open that box back up. But before we open the box up, we need to go back to, again, I think the key point that Rene says, which this video is a good introduction to, or this documentary is a good introduction to, is going back and looking at what people have been doing for the 30 years before Monster Quest came out, right? For a lot of people in this field, again, Monster Quest was their introduction to this. They don't know that they don't know about Peter Byrne's books, John Green's books. They don't know who Rene Dahinden is. They know Grover Krantz because they heard somebody tell a story about Grover Krantz's asking people for 40 years if they'd ever seen a corpse of a bear in the woods, right? They don't know what they were doing. They don't know who Tom Slick is. They don't know the people who pioneered this whole thing and the questions that they did ask in good faith, the things they did and explored in good faith, and the answers that they got.
I think
We need to explore
that
that.
can be, incidentally, I think that can be applied across all kinds of other
Oh,
paranormal,
absolutely.
Fortean fields, ufology, ghost hunting. I also think just generally it can be applied.
Yes.
People today have this very postmodern approach that they think they can just jump into a topic and somehow understand it from the zeitgeist at the time. But everything exists within these long historical and
Mhm.
cultural
Oh, yeah.
strains. And I think whether this show is any good or not, I think the real potential value might be of Mysterious Library, that at least you and I try to contextualize
Mhm.
these things within, a broader kind of tableau of history and culture and society. And I think that's what
Yep.
everybody should do. I think everybody should step back and go, well, this is the way
Mhm.
Bigfooters are approaching it today, but how are people doing it? Who are the founders? What's the difference in the
Yes.
results and the techniques, and what have
Mhm.
we learned and what haven't we learned? And not just in Bigfoot research, but in everything, just in
Yes.
general life. To look at things outside of a context
Mhm.
is just impoverishing, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, this again, to your point, all of life is like this. We've always, it's not just a Bigfoot thing. It is in everything. We have to know you have to know the history. Every problem that we have today has been addressed in the past one way or the other. If you don't learn from it, then you're just going to keep falling into the same ditches everybody else has, and you're never going to move forward. Who was it? Graham Hancock says we're a species with amnesia. Now, of course, he means it in the grander sense. I think of it as an intergenerational sense. It does seem like we keep making the same mistakes every 80 to 100 years. We sort of learn a lesson and then we completely forget that lesson within 2 generations, and then we're making the same mistake over and over and over again. So the mistake we should stop making is not watching this documentary, Sasquatch Odyssey. Particularly considering it's free on YouTube right now.
Indeed. Is it officially free there, though? I don't know.
Well, I don't know if it's officially free. You know what, go find it. It's out there somewhere.
Yeah. It's definitely worth a watch, just as a really like a time capsule. That alone is just fascinating.
Yep. No, it's a great little glimpse into the lives of these people who helped create and define this whole enterprise. And it's a lot of fun. If nothing else, it's a lot of fun to hear all the old stories and see them again. The scene where Rene is yelling at Byrne, it's beautiful. It really is.
Every part of Rene is entertaining every second he is on the screen. When Rene's on the screen, you're just riveted. I wish I could have met him as well. I'm not sure he would be as pleasant as Peter Byrne to hang out with, but he would be a heck of a good time. Everybody here was fun to hang out with today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in the chat. You were all very insightful, and although I may have disagreed with some of you and some of you disagreed with me, I wouldn't have it any other way, because that's what makes a free society healthy, to be able to disagree with each other. So thank you for your contributions.
No, absolutely. Guys, thank you. Chad, as always, y'all are amazing. We're going to be back here next week talking some more fun things. We're going to we don't know what we're going to do next week, but it'll be fun no matter what. So be here. Same Mysterious Library time, same Mysterious Library channel over here on Untold Radio. And again, don't forget, I've got the link in the description below. The Kickstarter for Sasquatch Legend Meets Science 2 is now up. You have an opportunity to go join, kick in a few bucks to help what is going to be, again, to really update this conversation so we can show Dean, sorry, he's over here, show Dean just how wrong he is about the physical Bigfoot.
I want to be proved wrong. Like I said, I would love nothing more than there were Sasquatches in my woods. That'd be fantastic. Flesh and blood Sasquatches. Exactly. There are probably paranormal ones in my woods, but flesh and blood ones.
Exactly. So go throw in a few bucks to prove Dean wrong. And on that note, we'll catch y'all next week behind the card catalog.